the most fascinating discoveries I made while I was in the cheese business. Really not fascinating, perhaps, not exactly, but interesting. Definitely interesting. One of the more interesting discoveries I made. This was long before I met Molly. For 3.5 years, I had a small goat farm on the island of Innisbake off the Mayo coast. No, not a farm for small goats, a farm for ordinary goats. Extraordinary goats, as it so happened, because I imported 2 piebald Iranian goats. And the reason I wanted them, the reason I wanted Iranians was that, according to all the research I had done and what all the experts had to say on the subject, they were reported to give the highest milk yield. Untrue, as it turned out. And also, their hides were highly prized in California's wall coverings. Equally untrue, I'm afraid. And although they bred successfully, eventually I had a herd of 14, they were unable to endure the Mayo winter, with the results that I had to keep them indoors and feed them for 6 months of the year. In Mayo, the winter lasts for 6 months, for God's sake. And of course, that threw my financial planning into disarray, as you can imagine. And yes, as a matter of fact, they are rather small animals, Iranian goats. And as I say, from Iran, which is an ancient civilization in Southwest Asia. But I was telling you about what? The interesting discovery. Well, perhaps not interesting in any general sense, but certainly of great interest to anybody who wants to make cheese from the milk of imported Iranian goats. Not that there are thousands of those people up and down the countryside. Anyhow, what I discovered was this. I had those goats for 3.5 years, and in all that time, their metabolism, their internal clock, stayed Iranian. They never switched to Irish time. Their system never made the transition. They lived in a sort of perpetual jet lag. So what, you may ask? So, for 3.5 years, I had to get up to feed them at 3 in the morning, my time, because that was 7 a.m. their time, their breakfast time. And worse, they couldn't stay awake and consequently couldn't be milked after 8 in the evening, because that was midnight their time. And they just lay there, dead asleep, snoring. Bizarre. Some imprints in their genes remained indelible and immutable. I read a brilliant magazine article by an American professor about this imprint. He called it an engram, from the Greek word meaning something that's inscribed or etched on something. He said this accounts for the brain's ability to recognize somebody we haven't seen in maybe 30 years. Then suddenly he appears. The sight of him connects with the imprint, the engram, and bingo! Instant recognition! That's an interesting word, engram. The only other time I heard it used was by Mr. Royce, Molly's ophthalmologist, in that swanky accent of his, engram. And he was born in the village of Kilmeady in County Limerick, for God's sake. I never did warm to that man. It's no wonder his wife cleared off with another man. I don't mean that. I really don't mean that. I shouldn't have said that. It's a rotten thing to say, sorry. But I was talking about the word engram and how he pronounced it. Now, this was before any of the surgeries. And he was explaining to Molly that even if by some wonderful miraculous chance her sight were to be restored, even partially restored, she would still have to learn to see. And that would be an enormous and incredibly difficult undertaking. The way he put it was this. She knew dozens of flowers, not by sight, not to see, but by touch and to smell, because those engrams, those tactile engrams, were imprinted in her brain from the time she was a child. But if she couldn't touch them, couldn't smell them, she wouldn't know one flower from another. She wouldn't know a flower from a football. How could she? And interestingly, the same question was being debated 300 years before by 2 philosophers, William Molyneux and his friend John Locke. I read about it in a do-it-yourself magazine of all places. Fascinating stuff, philosophy, fascinating. Anyhow, if you're blind, says William Molyneux, you can learn to distinguish the difference between a sphere and a cube by touching it, by feeling it. But if your sight is restored, can you, by sight alone, without touching, without feeling, can you tell which one is the sphere and which one is the cube? Oh, sorry, friend, says John Locke, you will not be able to tell which is which. And then who comes in to join the debate? Another philosopher, the Bishop George Berkeley, in his essay entitled Towards a New Theory of Vision. The same questions put to the Lord Bishop, he comes to the same conclusion as his 2 friends, only he takes it a step further. He claims that there is no necessary connection at all between the tactile world, the world of touch, and the world of sight. And that any connection that's to be established between the two can be done so only by living, only by experiencing, only by learning the connection. Which really is what Rice said to Molly 300 years later. That most of us are born with all five senses. And using the information they give us, we build up a sight world from the time we're born, a world of objects and ideas and meanings. We aren't given that world, he said. We have to make it ourselves by experience, by our memories, by making categories, by interconnections. Now, Molly only had 10 months of sight, and what she'd seen there in that time was forgotten. So, if her sight were restored, she would have to learn everything anew. She'd have to build up a whole new repertory of visual engrams and then make connections between those and the tactile engrams she already possessed. Put it another way, she'd have to create a whole new world of her own. How did I get into all that? Huh? Engrams. The gods, 3 o'clock in the bloody morning. I'll tell you what, I was on that island for 3.5 years and I lost 3 stone weight. And never once saw a single ounce of cheese. Not once, ever. Not that it would have mattered. I didn't go to Innisbeg to make my fortune. God knows why I went there. God knows why I've spent my life in dozens of mad schemes. My pal, Billy Hughes, he's an old pal of mine. Billy says, I'm hunted for God's sake. Always searching for whatever. Anyhow, back for a second. To our friend who could tell what the sphere was by touching it, but couldn't determine it by sight alone. Rice talked a lot to Molly about all that stuff. He said, neurologists have a word for people in that condition, seeing but not knowing, that's recognizing what it was they saw. He said people like that are called agnostic. Yeah, that's right, agnostic. And I thought that was strange, because I thought that word had to do with believing or not believing.